They're two happy women bringing you inspiring stories, politics, pop culture, and lifestyle hacks, all with an eye to making our communities and our country a better place to live. It's the Happy Women Podcast with your hosts, Jen Horn and Katie Gorka.
Thanks for joining us. It's another episode of the Happy Women Podcast. I'm Jennifer Horn.
And I'm Katie Gorka.
Oh, the lies the government has told us. Should we make a little list, Katie? Because there's a difference between the lies really coming true and then the gaslighting that has come out of the Biden administration. So we were told that the economy was fine, that inflation not a problem. There really wasn't anything to see, that it was the grocery stores price gouging you. There was that one. That was one of my favorites. Of course, the border was wide open, but it was completely safe if you asked the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, until I guess it wasn't. And now we're being overrun. One of my personal recent favorites, I think, was in the interview that J.D. Vance did before Christmas with Martha Raddatz. And Martha Raddatz said, don't you think that there's only just, a few apartment complexes being taken over in Aurora, Colorado by Tren de Aragua gangs? And he had to call her out and say, do you hear what you're saying? We have apartment complexes in our country being taken over by Venezuelan gangs. Not great. There's a lot of gaslighting that has happened over the last 4 years of the Biden administration, but it seems that there have been some pretty significant cover-ups and lies that have been hidden by the news media, by the Democrats, by the swamp. And all of a sudden, they're starting to see the light of day. It seems like the truth is really starting to come out. These are, I guess, lies the government told us, our episode on the Happy Women podcast today. But there's an extensive list, Katie.
Well, and I think it's really interesting because it's like we seem to be in this phase where Washington is starting to spill its secrets. And I don't know if it's that people feel safer now that they can come out with these things where they couldn't before, or is it people trying to save their skin? I don't know. I mean, I certainly don't think that's the case with the one story that really grabbed me. Of course, there was the very big story that came out a couple weeks ago, Wall Street Journal, where they talked to 50 different people, revealing basically the very poor state of Biden's state of mind. And actually, this would be a great time to play the clip that we have. President Trump has called this out, all the people that covered up for Biden's incompetence.
We were told that he was A-OK. Remember all of these people and their lies?
He has a vision. He has knowledge. He has judgment. He has a strategic thinking.
I met with the president, 5 or 6 weeks ago, and he seemed fine to me.
I have complete confidence in the president. I have watched him expertly guide meetings of staff and cabinet members. I could not have more confidence in the president.
I would just tell you that I meet frequently with the president, and every single time I meet with him, he is just fine.
But he is, again, knowledgeable, wise.
Incredibly sharp, incredibly probing, incredible command of the details.
He is sharp. He is on top of things.
There is nothing to these challenges, these suggestions that somehow he's not sharp and he's not capable.
Yeah. So you probably remember, and there's a whole lot more. I mean, we could spend an hour showing you clips of people defending President Joe Biden's behavior, his lack of decision making, his lack of command, the really disastrous mistakes he made, including the withdrawal from Afghanistan. But remember what they told us. It was his stutter at first, right? You can't make fun of Joe Biden because it was his stutter. Then it was Russian disinformation. Then they hid him. They sent him on vacation for 570 days during his tenure as president. They gave him scripts. Remember every single note card telling him what to say, who to call on. You have to know that these reporters were probably well screened by the press department. They said when he came out on stage and looked befuddled at that George Clooney event, that was a cheap fake, that wasn't a real video. And of course, they defended him when it came to the Hur report. Remember, Robert Hur investigating him for those classified documents said that he would not be capable to stand trial. All of those were lies that were told to the American people. And lo and behold, as you referenced, the Wall Street Journal has been doing incredible work. And I think it's a trusted source. Democrats and Republicans seem to look to the Wall Street Journal for news. And this story now, 50 staffers wanting to keep some anonymity, but coming out and saying that he was indeed not well the entirety of his presidency. And you had cabinet secretaries who said they barely saw him. He had very few cabinet meetings. He, in those meetings, seemed to be very confused. They try to keep him on point. And so the real question is just who in the heck has been running the country for the last 4 years? Because clearly those priorities and those responsibilities have been given to staffers around Joe Biden who were never elected to office, because it turns out he wasn't capable of tracking the real issues that were happening. It's frightening. We are lucky and blessed, actually, that the last 4 years haven't been even more of a disaster than we know them to be.
And I just find it so extraordinary in that clip that we played. All of these people who are leaders at the highest level in this country, we now know that they were just bald-faced lying to the American people about Joe Biden's state of mind. And it just makes you have to ask, if they're willing to lie about that, what else are they lying to us about? And so I just want to say, there was another, I'm so grateful to the Wall Street Journal, even though lately I think they're getting a little weird and squishy, but that piece was great. The fact that so many people were willing to come forward, even cabinet secretaries, to talk about the poor state of Joe Biden's mind. Well, now there's another article that really caught my attention. Again, Wall Street Journal doing some great work here. This is a piece that came out the day after Christmas. Behind closed doors, the spy world scientists who argued COVID was a lab leak. What I find so interesting here, the main sort of character in this story is a microbiologist named Jason Bannon, who worked for the FBI. He came in after 9/11, basically studying germ warfare. And he did a lot of research on the COVID-19 virus and came to the conclusion that it very likely did emerge from a lab, right? But that was at the same time that the intelligence community was briefing President Biden and saying it came from the zoonotic explanation, which means they argued that it jumped from an animal to a human, and that probably happened in that wet market, the infamous wet market in Wuhan. And what's so interesting
they brought out the pictures of the pangolins and stuff to try.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what I find so interesting is that Jason Bannon, this microbiologist, basically was excluded from those briefings. They did not want him briefing the president. And now we're finding out how even within the government itself, they are colluding. They are not just lying to us, they are lying to other members of the intelligence and law enforcement communities, which is really, really stunning.
Yeah, it's pretty unbelievable to read this story. Actually, a former guest on this podcast, Jennifer Van Laar, who works for Red State, I give her so much credit for being one of the first reporters to actually tell us what really happened with COVID. And by the way, she did it to her own detriment. I mean, there was so many attempts to try to silence her. And she had people who were coming to her, government informants who were coming to her. And I think what's even worse than this is if you really believe that this is now a lab leak, which not only did we get this article from the Wall Street Journal, but right before Christmas, another one of these revealing things came out with this congressional report on COVID, also kind of confirming that it was the lab leak. You have to look at how this happened. This was gain of function research. This was weaponized or this was testing, at least, whether they intentionally tried to release it or not. This was about weaponizing viruses and disease. And Dr. Fauci, the guy who was held up as a hero, who was made people's sexiest man of the year. Just let that one sink in. This guy, the Faucinator, was telling people that it was animal to human transmission, that it was not a lab leak, because he was trying to cover his own rear end. Because if you really start to investigate how this research even happened, Fauci was doing this in our country with the money from our government under Barack Obama. President Obama at that time said that this kind of research was way too dangerous to do. So he shut Fauci down. So what did Fauci do? Got his own money and funneled it over to Peter Zarzak over at the National Institute of Health. Those funds went to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And what happened next? They start doing this gain of function research again. This is what we believe anyway, or at least what I believe. And somehow, again, whether intentionally or accidental, this was released on all of us. And Fauci was held up as a hero and still is by half the country, Katie. That's what's so unbelievable to me, when it's very likely that his money, his funding this was his pet project. I mean, I see him as like an evil scientist in a James Bond movie, not a hero that was trying to protect us by putting cloth masks on our face. I mean, it's a huge lie that is now starting to see the light of day, that maybe, just maybe, everything they sold us, and you had scientists telling us, oh, they were certain that this was from an animal. Bold-faced lies.
And part of what this Wall Street Journal article reveals is the way in which parts of the U.S. intelligence community silenced those dissenting voices in the U.S. intelligence community. I just find that incredible.
We heard that the FBI was the only agency that was actually believing that this was a lab theory, according to this article. But it was actually, by and large, everybody who had any kind of backing in terrorist activity seemed to believe that this was exactly what it was. But we were not told that. Right. What else is what else is going to come out? That's what's scary about all this.
So here's what I want to tell you. So here for me is the big ultimate bomb. I have been just completely enwrapped for the last couple of days because Sebastian, my husband, connected with an old friend of ours on a book. This is the book. It's called The Insider Threat by Adam Lovinger. Adam Lovinger, when Sebastian and I first went to work for President Trump back in the first administration, Adam Lovinger came over from the Department of Defense to work at the National Security Council. And somehow we all connected. We all sort of had similar worldviews, very supportive of President Trump. And he was an absolutely lovely guy, very sort of erudite, elegant, kind. One day, he gets perp walked out of the National Security Council building, the old executive office building.
That's how you know he's right, when they start perp walking you.
He disappears. And it is absolutely incredible because that was, 8 years ago? And now he's come out with the story of what happened to him. And I am telling you, Tom Clancy has nothing on this guy and what Adam has been through. And what I find so impressive is not just what he went through in terms of the way the deep state mobilized to take him down, to cover up for their own ineptitude, their own corruption, and honestly, their own anti-Americanism. So he describes this cabal of people basically supportive of the America Last agenda of President Obama. And Adam kept challenging them when they were doing things that were not in America's interests. They were doing things that were illegal. And I'm telling you, he walks you through step by step how the deep state took him down. And it is Kafkaesque. It is terrifying, but it's also, I'm so torn about this book because on the one hand, it felt like such a sort of a heavy weight to see what someone could be put through, to see what some of our officials are capable of. But at the same time, it's kind of thrilling and exhilarating that Adam was brave enough to come out and name names and call people out and show us how it was being done. And I think, I'm telling you, this is just going to be a crazy, crazy ride, I think, for the next couple of years, because I think this is just the beginning. I think this spilling of secrets from Washington that we are seeing now over these last few weeks, I think the pace is going to pick up. And I think that people are going to be held accountable. So my question to you is, so we've talked about some of the secrets that have been spilled. What are the stories you most want to hear next? What
aliens?
No.
The drones. I got to know about the drones. And the globs. You've heard about the globs too, right?
Yeah. Well, I'll say for me, I think number one on my list is J6. I am really desperate to have the truth told about J6. It's no secret the world's unpredictable One moment, everything's fine, and the next, the power's out and the cell towers are down. But with a satellite phone from sat123.com, you don't have to be cut off from the world. No matter where you are or what's happening, Sat123 keeps you connected. Whether you're deep in the mountains, on the road, or dealing with a natural disaster, your satellite phone will work when nothing else does. This is about being prepared. Sat123.com is family owned, American built, and focused on keeping you safe. They understand that in today's world, connection is more than convenience. It's essential. So here's the deal. Go to sat123.com and use code Katie for $25 off your first purchase. Don't get caught off guard. Stay connected. Stay prepared with Sat123.
And, that's already starting to come out. I mean, there were some stories confirming that there were some FBI informants or assets that were in and around the Capitol on January 6th. Now, the mainstream news and media is coming out and saying that they were not told, they were not given any directives, but there is going to be so much more on January 6th and the treatment of the prisoners as well and where those directives have come from. So truly, in all seriousness, I just love to yell aliens, but at the top of my list is absolutely January 6th. I think we're also going to learn a whole lot more about Afghanistan. My gut tells me, and this is just my theory, understanding where we know Joe Biden's mental capacity was. Typically, when you see people who are in decline, they make rash decisions, they make dangerous decisions. It was always told to us President Trump would get us into a war. President Trump did not get us into a war. President Trump wanted to get us out of Afghanistan, but he listened to the generals and he didn't do it because he knew that it wasn't safe to do it for our servicemen and women. I believe Joe Biden didn't care. Yes, it was to try to coincide with 9/11, but I think this is probably the one decision that I think Joe Biden really has to own. I think in many ways, the country was run by his underlings and his staffers for the last 4 years. But I can imagine a scenario in which Joe Biden says, get the troops blanking out of Afghanistan, screams it, and walks out of the room. And that's what they did. And 13 men and women died because of it. And I think we're going to learn more about that, really sadly. And I also think it's just, as an interlude, people always ask who was running the country. How did Joe Biden get elected? I've said for a long time, and again, gut instinct here, that it is not, I love to give credit to Obama being the big bad puppet master and all of this, but I really believe it's the swamp of the Democrat Party that has really been running things. I think Obama is just as controllable as Joe Biden was, and he would do their bidding. I don't think that he's the big evil genius sending out orders. I think it is the Democrat machine, because if you look at this last election cycle, Joe Biden was never supposed to be the candidate that was going to win. Remember, he was losing in every single primary until swamp creature James Clyburn comes out in South Carolina and says, vote for Joe Biden. Joe's the man, because they knew he was controllable. They picked him because he was demented, because he could be controlled. He wouldn't get out of line like some of maybe the other candidates that were more with it. And Clyburn comes over and says, vote for him in South Carolina. He's extremely powerful. He wins one state, and they spin that into a victory. And when have we seen the Democrats do that before? When Hillary was taking on Bernie Sanders. This is a classic page from the Democrat Party's handbook. And I think they're the ones who have been running this party. The unnamed people are the most dangerous. The people that we don't know are the most dangerous, because they can hide behind the scenes and everybody says, oh, it's Obama pulling the strings. And I hate to disappoint all my conspiracy loving friends, but I really believe it goes much deeper and darker than that. And they gave us Joe Biden, not because the voters wanted him, but they spun a story with the help of the mainstream news media. I believe they wanted Kamala all the time because they thought she was the most controllable, but she wasn't likable. So they get Joe in there and then force her as vice president on him. He would have never picked her. She called him a racist. I don't know. It just seems to me that that may be an interesting story that we uncover too, is what the heck happened in 2020. And obviously we all have questions about the outcome of that election initially, but it's interesting to see how this all comes up. Now, another story that we were told did not exist, Katie, was all about Hunter Biden. Remember, Hunter Biden was just living his life, doing his job, being hired to do these crazy board positions in Ukraine and China. Well, lo and behold, thanks to the work of America First Legal, they had to sue the National Archives to get photographs released Remember when Joe Biden said he never had any business dealings with his son? Well, it turns out there are a slew of pictures of then Vice President Joe Biden meeting Hunter's business partners, particularly in China. These pictures were taken in 2013, and he's shaking hands and doing photo ops with the business partners of Hunter after he lied to us and said he never had anything to do with his son's business dealings. And what now? 11 years later, those pictures are allowed to come out because of lawsuits. Crazy.
Well, I think this raises a really interesting question about justice versus revenge. The issue of revenge has been a sort of prominent theme for the last couple months. I've had conversations with Democrats. I know a few reasonable Democrats who have said, when I've asked them what are the issues that you have with Trump, and they say they think he's vengeful. And I think this is one of the stories that's been spun to smear him. I don't think he's vengeful at all. I think it's absolutely incredible, actually, how lacking in vengeance he has been. And I don't think anybody wants to see vengeance. But I think everybody wants to see justice. And I think Americans are absolutely fed up with the people that have engaged in malfeasance and not paid any price for it. I was reminded again of that terrible character, Peter Strzok. You remember this whole story? Peter Strzok and his
what was her name? Lisa Page.
Yeah, Lisa, right. And they were, texting each other. Well, he's at the heart of this story about the insider threat by Adam Lovinger. And so to be reminded of Peter Strzok and various other people that have never paid a price for anything. And indeed, Adam Lovinger tells the story of various people inside the Department of Defense. Not only do they not pay a price for acts of treason, lying, misspending, incompetence, they actually all get promoted.
Yeah.
And, I'm just dying to see people removed from their positions. I think there are people that absolutely need to go to jail. I don't see why ordinary Americans can be held accountable and our leadership is not. And it really undermines the whole system to have that happening.
I think one of the biggest responsibilities that's sitting on the shoulder of President Trump and his incoming team is to clean up the CIA, the FBI, the intel community, and that's a huge undertaking. And literally you have 2 years and you have a swamp that doesn't want to have its head cut off. And so when we talk about vengeance, if President Trump were vengeful, Hillary Clinton would be sitting in jail right now. She is not. That is not how it went down. What did happen, however, is that President Biden, or whoever was around him, used his presidential power to weaponize against everybody. I mean, think about all of these people around Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon who sat in jail for what? For what? Why would they be there? President Trump, who had his house searched. Why did they need to go into Melania's bedroom? This was all about embarrassing him and weaponizing the system against anybody who was looking for truth. And the J6ers are included in that. So I think the heavy load for me is to see how you can clean that up in a short amount of time, because that is the most dangerous thing that's going on. The inside of our government working against not only the American people, but America. And it's frightening. You have people in there who are willing to destroy their country for their own well-being. And he's got a huge, gargantuan task ahead of him to try to clean that out. But I think it's the most important. If he can do that, our country is better for it in the next 4 years.
I have to say, so one of my big hopes as we go into this new administration is that we will have learned the lessons of the first administration when people got taken out, when Adam Lovinger gets perp walked out of the old executive office building, when Mike Flynn got thrown out really for no legitimate reason. And one of the things that's so interesting about this book, again, it's called The Insider Threat by Adam Lovinger. I could not put it down. I read the whole book, and I'm telling you, it is one of the best books I've ever read. I read the whole thing in 2 sittings. I could not stop reading it because he walks you through it step by step, how they do this. And it's like they've got a whole system. They deliberately created situations where they would then be able to have dirt on somebody or manufacture dirt based on some, plausible circumstances, and they would take people down. So one of my big hopes for this next time around, and I think it will come true, is that if we see this happening to people, that we come around them, we stand by them, we don't fall for the lies and the falsehoods and the attacks. And again, as you know, this is very, very personal for us. I've said this before, but I think Sebastian at one point calculated in the first 3 months of the first administration, there were 400 attack articles written about him. Media outlets sent teams to Budapest to track down his PhD thesis to see if there was any plagiarism. That's the thing that they got Monica Crowley on.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad to see that
she's back.
She's back. She's going to have an important role. But I think it's a really important lesson. It will happen. They will try. They are going to try to save themselves. And we need to come around those people and defend them and not let them get taken down.
I think we're in a different spot. At least I hope we are.
I
feel like Michael Flynn was the first, and I think a ton of people turned on him. A ton of people turned on Michael Flynn. And I don't have the relationship that you probably do with him, but the times that I have talked to him and interviewed him, he always seems to be so straightforward and genuine. It doesn't seem like he's this evil man that they wanted to attack. We can't do that anymore. And I think we're awake to that. I think conservatives are ready to stand around people. I think the difference between Michael Flynn and how Steve Bannon's being received by conservatives, it tells you that there's a change, which is good.
That's a great contrast. Absolutely.
We've come a long way. Now, There's one more scandal that's just breaking now, actually, as we do this show. Catherine Herridge, who's a great reporter, she worked for CBS, got fired because she was doing too much research into Hunter Biden's laptop. That was Russian disinformation, you might remember. Wink, wink.
Yep.
She has spent some time now. She's doing all kinds of investigations on Twitter. This is her new platform. And I think this is where a lot of real journalists are going to go to avoid the mainstream news media. They're going to go to social media. And she's talking now to a former intel officer who says that they had career-ending injuries caused by foreign-directed energy weapons. Remember Havana syndrome, Katie? We all heard about this. And then the government came out and said, no, there's nothing to it. Those are false reports. Well, it turns out there is this person now is a whistleblower who leaked a Department of Defense letter acknowledging that the injuries are absolutely real. So Catherine Herridge has this interview. I listened to it a little bit this morning before we started recording. And she says that the leaked Defense Department letter acknowledges injuries and experiences are real. It's a cover-up. And apparently, this is pretty terrifying for all of us. So the foreign adversary likely behind the national security officials' Havana syndrome injuries used a high-powered microwave system weapon. They brought people under attack in Africa, all over the globe. There are multiple weapons and multiple instances of these weapons being used and deployed against DoD employees. The symptoms include crippling cognitive and neurological symptoms. The CIA director apparently privately blamed Russia for all of this. I don't think that's a huge stretch. But the government then comes out and says there's nothing to see here. These people had hundreds of thousands of dollars of medical debt, and they call it brain injury that makes it impossible for them to work anymore. There is cancer that's been linked to this, dementia, Parkinson's disease. These people who came out and complained about these symptoms had their security clearances revoked. Female officers who said they had these injuries were asked if they were pregnant or if they were sad because they weren't pregnant or if these were hormonal problems. Yet instead, they got a hold of this DoD letter, internal, that says that indeed these injuries are real, even though to the public and to the people who are suffering with these injuries, they were not providing them with the help that they needed or the help to offset their medical bills, just something that was clearly experienced in the line of duty. This story, I think, is going to be big. And it's just another instance of the government telling us one thing when they know that something else is entirely true. It's just, you would think something like this would be okay to talk about because it's not necessarily Trump related. It's not necessarily swamp related. Why in the world would the Department of Defense not want to come out and say we had agents who were injured at the hands of a foreign adversary? I don't get it.
I don't get it. I mean, are they just trying to cover themselves so as not to have the liability? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me, but it's just so
it's just another lie. It's another lie.
Yeah. It's really incredible.
All right. Well, there we have some of our big lies that have now started to come true. What's next? Are we going to learn more about January 6th, the anniversary of that, just around the corner? Are we going to learn more about what happened to try to figure out how to get our troops out of Afghanistan, about the 2020 election? What will we hear next? And is President Trump and his team ready to take apart the intel community? He's got some great people in place to do it, but there's big stuff ahead of us, and we're going to be here with you the whole way. And of course, you can always comment. Let us know what you think of these scandals and secrets that have been spilled. And those 5-star reviews, always greatly appreciated. Please share Happy Women with your friends. It really does help us. And get Katie's book. It's called Next Gen Marxism. Get that at Amazon, wherever you get your books. Let's also give a plug to your friend, Adam Levinger. The book is called, I just wrote it down, The Insider Threat.
Yep.
Great. So make sure you get that wherever you get your books as well. And follow Katie. Give her a look online, katiegorka.org. You can search her out on Facebook. Just look for Catherine Gorka, or on X at Gorka Katie. And you can find me on social media too, Jennifer Horn Radio on Instagram and Facebook, and at Jennifer Horn on Truth and on X. Thanks so much for joining us. Happy New Year to all of you. Can't wait for more episodes of Happy Women in 2025. It's another episode of the Happy Women podcast.